3 days before this wildcard even existed, Alex Eala was walking off a court in Cincinnati after losing in the round of 32. Ordinary week. Ordinary loss. Nobody was writing headlines about her that day. Then Monday came, and the United States Tennis Association released a list. 11 of the 16 teams for this year's U.S. Open mixed doubles main draw, 6 of them locked in through combined singles ranking, 5 handed out as wildcards. Her name was on that second list, next to Felix Auger-Aliassime, the man ranked 4th in the world among men. Neither of them had ever played a match together before this announcement. By that evening, people online weren't calling it a wildcard anymore. They were calling the two of them a power couple, like it was already a fact instead of a headline someone made up an hour earlier. Here's what most of the coverage skipped past. This bracket isn't a warm-up event tucked into a quiet corner of the tournament grounds. Novak Djokovic, 24 Grand Slam titles to his name, is playing it alongside Aryna Sabalenka, the top-ranked woman in the world right now. Behind them, Elena Rybakina and Taylor Fritz. Behind them, Diana Schneider and Daniil Medvedev. Behind them, Iga Swiatek and Casper Ruud, last year's runners-up. That's the company Alex just got dropped into, on her first attempt at this format at this level. So, ask the obvious question. Out of 16 teams, why spend one of only 5 wildcards on a woman who has almost no meaningful doubles record to speak of? The Tennis Association doesn't hand out 5 slots carelessly. Every one of those slots gets debated, weighed, argued over by people whose job is filling stadiums, not just filling a bracket. This year, the qualifying tournament alone drew 8 teams fighting for just 2 remaining spots, proof that plenty of doubles specialists wanted in through the front door. Somebody made a decision here, and the decision wasn't about her forehand. There's a version of this story where none of that matters, where it really is just a nice gesture toward a popular young player. Stick with this one for a bit longer, because that version doesn't hold up once you look at what's actually riding on the next 2 weeks for her and for the tournament that picked her. Money is part of it, but not in the way people assume. This year's U.S. Open is carrying the largest prize purse the tournament has ever offered. Mixed doubles used to be treated like filler, something top singles players skipped without a second thought. A few years back, organizers rebuilt the entire format specifically to stop that, compressing it into 2 loud, star-filled days instead of stretching it across a slow 2-week grind nobody outside hardcore fans bothered watching. It worked. Now the draw sheet reads like a highlight reel of the sport's biggest names. None of that prize money explains why Alex herself is taking this particular risk, though. She's carrying 2 separate campaigns into the same fortnight. In singles, she's chasing a spot inside the top 15, a number she's never touched in her career. Going in as a player, people now expect things from instead of a surprise nobody saw coming. That shift alone changes how a tournament feels for a 21-year-old who spent most of her teenage years training an ocean away from home at the Rafael Nadal Academy, building toward exactly this kind of week. Layer doubles on top of that, a format she's barely touched competitively, and the math gets uncomfortable fast. Lose early and awkwardly out there, in front of a packed Louis Armstrong or Arthur Ashe crowd, and that feeling doesn't stay contained to one bracket. Athletes talk about this constantly. A rough match follows you off the court and sits with you walking into the next one, whether you want it to or not. And there's no easing into this format quietly on some backcourt either. Every mixed doubles match this year plays out on the tournament's 2 biggest stages, compressed into a 2-day sprint before the semifinals, and final wrap the whole thing up. No slow build, no quiet first round to shake off nerves, just cameras, a full crowd, and 2 days to figure out chemistry with someone she's never shared a court with. So why say yes to that risk at all, when singles is where her ranking points actually come from? The real answer has almost nothing to do with what Alex wanted. It has everything to do with who picked her, and why, out of every possible pairing, they could have written onto that draw sheet instead. If you already know her story, you know she rarely does anything the quiet way. If you're only meeting her name for the first time right here, good timing, because what's coming next explains exactly why the Tennis Association landed on these 2 specific players, and why that choice stopped looking like generosity the moment you actually dig into it, past the headlines, and straight into the numbers nobody bothered checking first. 5 slots. That's the whole allotment. Not a generous number, not a courtesy round for popular names, 5 actual decisions the Tennis Association had to sit down and make. So set aside why they wanted Alex somewhere on this tournament's radar. The sharper question is why they spent one of those 5 rare openings on a woman with almost no doubles resume worth mentioning. Ticket sales explain part of it, and that part checks out. Back in Miami, she entered that tournament as a wild card herself, a total afterthought on paper, and walked out of it in the semifinals. She beat Jelena Ostapenko, a former Grand Slam champion, on the way there. She beat Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open winner. She beat Iga Swiatek, ranked second in the world at that point. 3 results like that, stacked back-to-back, from someone most casual fans couldn't have named a month earlier. Only 2 other wildcards in that tournament's entire history had ever made it as far as she did, and both of them went on to hold the #1 ranking eventually. Weeks later, she added another line to that story, winning her first career WTA title at the Mubadala DC Open. 21 years old, first title of her career, and the first player from the Philippines to ever win one on tour. Not a runner-up finish, an actual title, with a trophy and everything. She'd never even reached a tour-level final before that week, which made the win land even harder for people trying to figure out where her ceiling actually sits. 2 separate moments, months apart, built on the exact same shape. Somebody hands her an opening nobody expected her to get, and she turns it into something impossible to ignore. Look at where her ranking sat before any of this started. Less than 2 years ago, she wasn't inside the top 100 players on the entire planet. She's since climbed into the top 20, one of the sharpest rises the tour has clocked, from a player her age in recent memory, and that kind of trajectory doesn't happen through luck repeated 3 or 4 times in a row. It happens because every single time she's handed a big stage, she does something worth remembering on it. She's also picked up wins over 4 different top 20 opponents this season alone, spread across 4 different tournaments, which is the kind of consistency that stops looking like a hot streak and starts looking like an actual level shift. So this isn't the first occasion a wild card turned into a real headline for her. It's the second, which tells you the Tennis Association wasn't guessing when they made this call. They'd already watched this exact formula work once, up close, and they know precisely what it looks like when it does, except that only explains half the decision. It tells you why her name belongs somewhere on the sheet. It doesn't explain why they specifically paired her with a top 4 men's player instead of, say, an experienced doubles specialist who spent years building real chemistry on that side of the net, someone who wouldn't be walking in half blind to a format this unfamiliar, learning the footwork and the positioning in real time under stadium lights. That particular choice wasn't about her resume at all. It was about something happening, completely outside the numbers. Here's the detail most coverage glossed right over. The instant this pairing went public, before anyone had bothered analyzing rankings or draw difficulty, the internet had already made up its mind about what this was. Not a wildcard team, not an underdog story. A power couple, according to headlines that wrote themselves within the hour. 2 athletes both mid-career year, both already pulling huge crowds independently of each other, suddenly sharing a court for the first time in front of everyone. Neither of them staged that reaction. Felix didn't ask for it, and neither did Alex. It happened entirely on its own, purely because of who these 2 people are and how their names read together in a headline. He's coming off a strong season in his own right, reaching the quarterfinals at both the French Open and Wimbledon this year, plus a 2nd straight title at a smaller event back in February. This isn't some unranked name attached to a rising star for borrowed attention. He's a legitimate top 4 player having his own breakout year, which only made the online reaction land louder and faster. The Tennis Association understands exactly what a reaction like that is worth in practical terms. A pairing people won't stop talking about online moves more tickets and pulls more eyeballs than a technically superior team nobody outside hardcore fans has heard of. That's not some cynical read on the sport. That's simply how attention functions in professional tennis right now, and every major tournament on the calendar is competing for the same slice of it, fighting over the same headlines and the same trending moments during the exact same 2-week window every August. Check the rest of this year's wildcard list, and the pattern gets obvious fast. Elina Svitolina and Gael Monfils, a married couple, with Monfils openly calling this one of the final seasons of his career. That's a farewell story stitched directly into the bracket. Sara Errani and Andrea Vavassori defending their title from 2 years ago, even though neither of their singles rankings alone would have gotten them anywhere near this draw. That's a legacy story. Frances Tiafoe paired with Leylah Fernandez, 2 Americans with their own devoted followings. Alexander Zverev paired with Taylor Townsend, a former doubles champion herself, pairing up with one of the sport's bigger personalities. Run down every wildcard team on that sheet, and not one of them earned the slot through doubles pedigree. Every single one of them arrived with a story already built in before either player picked up a racket for this event. None of these 5 decisions came down to who ranked highest on paper. Everyone came down to who already had a reason for people to care before. The first point was even played. Alex and Felix fit that exact mold. 2 single stars, both riding career-defining seasons, meeting for the first time on a court that already has millions of eyes locked onto it before either of them has hit a single ball. A level of pre-match attention doubles specialists almost never get, regardless of how good they actually are. Put both halves of the picture together now. Alex needs ranking points and needs to start building genuine credibility in doubles at this level. The tournament needs a story its audience can't stop discussing, in a year already carrying the biggest prize fund in its history. This was never charity flowing from one side to the other. It was a trade, plain and simple, where both parties needed something, and this exact pairing delivered it to each of them simultaneously, without either side having to ask the other for a favor. That's the real twist buried in this whole story. Not luck, not a favor. A calculated bet made by people who understand precisely what kind of narrative moves tickets, in a year where moving tickets matters more than it ever has before, with a stadium full of seats needing a reason to sell out fast. A calculation only means something once you check whether that same bet has ever actually paid off in the past, though. Anyone can make a confident guess dressed up as strategy. The real test is history, and whether that history backs the theory up or quietly undercuts it. If this has you rethinking how these calls actually get made behind closed doors, that's exactly the intended effect. Stick around, because what comes next digs into whether USTA's gamble has real precedent behind it, or whether they're simply hoping the same trick lands twice in a row, with a lot more riding on the outcome this time. Look past the headline for a second and check the actual numbers behind Alex's climb. Less than 2 years ago, she sat outside the top 100 entirely. Today, she's world number 20. That kind of jump, compressed into that shorter window, ranks among the fastest rises the WTA has clocked from someone her age, in recent memory. And it isn't the product of one lucky stretch either. She's been training at the Rafael Nadal Academy since she was 13, building toward exactly this kind of week for most of her life, an ocean away from home the whole time. What looks sudden from the outside has actually been under construction for years. But the strongest argument for this wildcard isn't really about Alex at all. It's about a team that walked this exact same path 2 years earlier, and what happened to them once the matches actually started. Back at the 2024 US Open, Sara, Errani, and Andrea Vavassori entered the mixed doubles draw through a wildcard too. Nobody expected much from them going in. They were the only traditional doubles pairing in a field otherwise stacked with singles, stars, and most people assumed they'd lose early and vanish from the conversation within a day or two. Instead, they went all the way to the final and beat Iga Swiatek and Casper Ruud to take the title, a team most fans hadn't even bothered learning both names for going into that first round. A team that walked in as an afterthought, walked out as champions, proving that a wild card doesn't automatically mean a short, forgettable stay. So this isn't the first time the Tennis Association has bet on a story instead of trusting a spreadsheet full of rankings. It's happened before, and the last time it happened, the outcome was about as good as it could possibly have gone. It handed the tournament a champion nobody predicted going in, plus a storyline that stayed in circulation long after the trophy ceremony wrapped up, which changes what the real question here actually is. It was never really about whether Alex and Felix belong in this draw. That part got settled the moment history backed it up. The real question is how far a pairing like theirs can actually travel once the matches begin, and whether a formula like this one can genuinely strike twice inside the same event. And that question carries real risk in both directions, not just one. Lose early and lose fast, and the narrative flips instantly. People will say the Tennis Association gambled and came up empty. They'll say the whole arrangement turned the tournament into a marketing exercise dressed up as competition, and that particular headline tends to stick around, resurfacing every time this exact conversation comes back up next season. That's the downside. Almost nobody's willing to say out loud right now, the version of this story where the bet simply doesn't land and somebody eventually has to answer for it, probably in a press conference nobody wants to sit through. But push deep into this tournament instead, and something considerably bigger happens. The WTA and the USTA will have proven, for a second time, that selecting a team based on the story attached to their names instead of the number next to it can genuinely pay off. That's not a minor footnote either. That's a formula other tournaments will start studying closely, one capable of quietly reshaping how wildcards get distributed at every major event going forward. Not just this one. Zoom out, and here's where all of this actually leaves things. The United States Tennis Association just committed $100 million in total prize money to this tournament, and part of that financial bet is riding on two specific people who had never once shared a court together before this particular month. The format only gives them 2 days to prove the entire theory correct, first round and quarterfinals on the same afternoon, semifinals and the final the very next day. If the pairing works out, everyone will call it obvious after the fact. People will say, of course it worked. look at exactly who they picked, like the outcome was never really in doubt. If it falls apart instead, somebody's going to have to explain why they took this specific risk in the first place, and why a formula that worked perfectly 2 years earlier suddenly stopped delivering. Either outcome is coming fast. The draw kicks off on August 25th, with barely 48 hours separating the opening match from a finished champion. 2 days. That's the entire window this whole theory gets to prove itself right or spectacularly wrong in front of the exact crowd the Tennis Association was counting on to show up and fill every one of those seats, cameras rolling from the very first serve. That's when everyone finds out whether this was the smartest decision USTA made all year, or the one people keep bringing up for years afterward for entirely the wrong reasons. Stay close if you want to actually watch how this plays out in real time. Because a story built this specifically, you don't want to catch secondhand once everybody else has already decided what it meant, long after the version that actually matters has already come and gone.